So, rations. We eat them. They're an essential staple to the adventuring diet, a concoction of dried foods for only 5 silver pieces at your local adventuring grocery store. But, aren't rations also, super boring? I can't be alone in thinking that one, right? So, how can we fix that? Food rations is one of those things that's just impossible to avoid in whichever D&D campaign you find yourself in, unless you like starving to death or playing Warforged. It's simple, it's food. According to Raw, the average player has to eat around half a kilo of food every couple of days to avoid getting exhausted, which, according to the conventions of the modern man at least, is a precious scarce amount. And let me tell you, I have never used this rule. Apart from the fact that food is super cool and I like to utilize it, I cannot imagine the shriveled husks of adventurers that you would become by playing this rule straight. So, well, let's not. A home rule that I didn't even realize we were using for a while is the way that my DM runs food. Her rules are simple as anything, to the point that I just figured it was raw. Eat at least 1 meal per day or take a level of exhaustion. Shockingly enough, this rule has never actually come to fruition yet. We are all very well-fed little adventurers, and even if we weren't, we have a Warforged hoarding a collection of very old rations over there. Plus, the man has proficiency with cook's utensils should we ever need it. But I do like how it gives us an incentive to eat. Whilst this works well in towns where we can go and fetch lunch or get a meal at our lodgings, I don't quite feel that pull when we go out on the road. Meals are straight regulated to whatever generic rations we bought at the last minute before heading out. I don't really take any joy in handing over silvers for foodstuffs that only exist to reduce by 1 at every long rest. And their integrations from my experience has been incredibly simplistic too. Just remember to use one of your rations after we finish a long rest and that's it. And well, I'd like to fix that. I think the problem with rations is that, well, there just isn't much to do with them. For such an item and mechanic that is sure to pop up in every game under the sun, they really don't have much in terms of flavor, which is a real shame considering it's food. Whilst the item description itself does claim them to potentially include foods like jerky and fruit and nuts, it's really just a suggestion, so most of the time it just reduces the rations to an amorphous amount of unnamed food substances. I can't really even say too much here, they're just rations. But they make me feel disconnected from the world at large since they come off as just so meaningless. The most meaningful use of rations I've seen was feeding them to a bird, which, to be fair, is a very good use of them, but you could also fill my entire pack with salt crackers and I wouldn't know the difference. This isn't really a fault of the DM, there just isn't much to work with without really working it out behind the scenes from scratch. So why not take it from another angle? My fix-it is pretty straightforward in terms of narrative. Instead of hard-focusing rations, what about eating from the land? This is something that particularly works well for me since the culture of my homebrew world is very hunter-gatherer styled. But even without that, I see it as a narrative and immersion boon. Creating food environments is just one of the ways that I like to flesh out my worlds. I choose or create some plants and animals to live in certain areas of the world. It benefits my goals of creating a living and breathing world, and what better way to assist that existing work than to put it into more places? If I'm going to waste my time mapping out natural growths of vegetation, animal habitats, and the seasonality of various species, you can bet your butt I'm going to make you see it, and then eat it for a delicious and well-balanced meal. And looking into it during editing, I found these lovely little rules. Emphasis on little, which yet again are just a blanket covering over the issue. These don't give a shred of depth, unfortunately, lumping all foods again into unnamed foodstuffs. Hold on, is this just a normal survival check? Yeah, I think we can do better. Back to it. How I like to integrate it is by putting it into encounters. I think most people think that encounters are strictly a combat thing, but I disagree. Encounters should just provide a way for your players to interact with the world in a slightly more sandboxy way than usual. whilst of course do include fights within the day, perhaps an encounter can be noticing some game in the area and trying to hunt it without spooking them, or stumbling across some lush vegetation and figuring out which of the funny-looking mushrooms is the edible one. Building some hunter-gatherer style life into the natural day can help it from feeling tacked on at the end or a hassle that players have to go out of their way for. I think it can also help keep things fresh because not every townward ramble has to be crawling with goblins and wolves trying to hit their violence quota. Further, it creates more use for the underutilized. Take survival for example. It takes a certain niche game to be able to use that one very much, as well as nature and potentially animal handling, or any part of the ranger set really. I also think tools as a whole come off as pretty niche from besides I guess thieves' tools, so I want to bring some life and everyday utility into cook's utensils. And oh damn, there's even a feat associated with cooking here. I hate the feeling that making a choice to take a skill or feat or proficiency can feel wasted or not worth it. So I'd rather try to work in more utility for the things that my players do take into the broader world. I suppose a gripe with it comes from playing a druid that is also a ranger, as many of my skills just don't come up that often. I don't think I've utilized my favorite enemy once, and said proficiencies are falling to the wayside too. But there are tons of little out-of-combat skills that I'd like to be able to use. Things to make the nature specialists actually feel like specialists instead of getting out-perceptioned by an inner-city rogue. It also succeeds in giving more of your players some campfire utility, even without tool proficiencies. Surely all of your party can help out in some way. Get some good use for some quote-unquote useless spells or abilities that you just want to toss a dice at, as well as allowing for some nice and simple roleplay moments. Cooking isn't usually a one-man effort. Get some of the party to set up a fire, gather some kindling, some rocks, a fire cantrip to light it. Have someone to go fetch water or do some gathering of last-minute supplies. Perhaps one of the party has a recipe book that they pilfered from somewhere. And of course, you need someone to peel the veggies too. The campfire cooking experience shouldn't be relegated to who has cook's utensils. Make it a party-wide experience. Maybe someone screws up a little skill check and messes things up a touch. Make the cooking an event in itself, something to be remembered by, even if it ends up being a stew every time. And perhaps, maybe your party likes to rib each other for a funny tasting pot anyways. I said this last time, but food is so essential from the social perspective. And giving your party something palpable to talk about can really help with jump-starting roleplay opportunities. Especially good for putting a foot in the door for our less talkative party members. Additionally, for my homebrew, I have a buff table associated with eating a certain amount of meals and the quality of food. This doesn't have to work for your world, but I like it for me as I'm trying to build a food-centric culture. I work it by tying meals to exhaustion. No food and bam, point of exhaustion. And this can sound a little bit rough on paper since Raw gives you a couple days probably before it hits you, but trust me here, with the intention that I'm trying to incentivize eating. For one meal, I give you a chance of exhaustion and eat 2 or more meals and you're all good. But from there, I like to add buffs. Eat 3 meals and you can fetch yourself a little bonus for the day. My little boon tables gives you anything from inspiration to AC to proficiencies. Just try to make eating feel good. Give reasons for your players to actively engage with the homebrew systems. And it doesn't even have to be random buffs necessarily. You can easily give them a tailored buff depending on the types of food they eat or something relevant to an event you have planned, like poison resist before dumping them to the spider's den. Give your healthy and well-prepared players a little pat on the back every now and then. So, food. Eating on the road doesn't have to be a boring or forgotten affair. Considering foregoing rations in exchange for a light spot of hunting and see if it livens up the adventuring day. Food can and should be fun. Use it as an excuse for role-playing, a way to expand your worlds, and a way to reward your players for engaging with the systems. And of course, a way to have fun. See you next time.